Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Thank you for joining us for this week's edition of the SMIE Consulting Midweek Roundup. I'm your host, Marty Bennett, and today, Wednesday, June 12th, 2024, we're going to be answering 3 questions we've been hearing from international educators over the last few days. And as we do each week, we take our 3 questions from our newsletter that comes out each Monday. And that comes out in a couple different forms through an email version that you can subscribe to at our website, smieconsulting.org/subscribe. And the other version is via our LinkedIn profiles. You can catch that through my personal LinkedIn profile, Marty Bennett, but you can search for all the SMIE news fit to share for the actual subscription page for that newsletter. And just between the 2 of those profiles now, we're up to 1,950 subscribers in the international ed community that are currently getting our international ed news through all the SMIE news fit to share newsletter each week. So happy to be part of that many people's international edification each and every week. And as we do each week, we take the themes from those news stories around common areas, and we turn those into questions to go a little bit more in depth into the individual topics to shed some light on how we might be adopting or changing the way we do things as these news stories might indicate there be opportunity to do so. And we look at, in the newsletter, we look at both social media, which will cover everything, basically everything online, from blogs to digital reports to white papers to upcoming webinars, anything that's social media or digital, that will be covered in that section. Then we have big picture questions, our big picture topics, Solutions Central, and then a global roundup from different countries around the world and how they are grappling with different topics related to international education in their countries. So that's the theme of the newsletter each week, and then we take 3 of those topics each week, convert them into questions, and go more in depth here on the roundup. So for those that aren't aware, this roundup goes out live every Wednesday at 1 p.m. Eastern time, unless I'm traveling and there's different time zones. But we also make this available not only through the video lives and recorded versions on Twitter, YouTube, LinkedIn, and Facebook, but also we podcast this in an audio-only version that you can catch on any of the major social media platforms or podcast providing platforms. So I encourage you to subscribe if you're not already to the newsletter, and make sure that you get the roundup either for your podcast listening habits or find time for international edification each week using the Midweek Roundup. So let's get right into our first question of the week. And that has to do with what are future students saying about their priorities. Now, one of the things that we often get sometimes carried away with in international education, particularly international student recruitment, is hyper-focusing on themes we see in individual survey results. And always, when you look at these survey results, you want to look at the breadth of the pool of students surveyed, what countries they're in, break down that sort of way, and not to get too wrapped up in individual responses. But that being said, there is certainly great value in keeping your finger on the pulse as some of these surveys come out. Everybody's got a different survey. Today we're going to focus on one in particular. That's the Keystone Group survey that has I think it's well over 27,000 prospective students responding, representing 195 countries. They had a webinar yesterday, and then there's also a report that I'll be sharing with you today that has all of those details in it. Now, the Keystone report is called The State of Student Recruitment. And the webinar is the first link I've dropped in the chat, and I'll also be dropping in the ICEF monitor report on that, on the Keystone webinar, or the report that the survey is based on. So that'll also be in the chat for you to use and peruse. And of course, if you've already got the newsletter from Monday, you already have these links in there in the email version or the LinkedIn version. So please do double check those if you want further details. Now, for this survey, 27,500 prospective international students that were surveyed on a variety of key decision points in their planning for studying abroad. Also, they were surveyed about barriers to application and why they're studying abroad or where they're looking to study abroad. So many of the respondents were from Africa. So this is also the demographic of those 195 countries is important because that obviously will color perhaps the issues that might be more significant in certain areas. If they're a majority or a large percentage of the survey respondents, then you know probably these are going to be some of the issues that they might focus on more than, say, other areas in the other surveys. So the breakdown for this Keystone group of the 27,000 plus students: Africa 38%, Asia 34%, Europe 19%, Latin America only 2%. So that's obviously key to keep in mind that Asia represents 70% of international students currently in the United States, so very underrepresented in this overall survey result. Africa is probably in the 10 to 15% range of international students in the U.S. right now, so very small. So we keep those numbers in mind. Europe is about right. Now, they were all the students that were responding were bound for higher education. There were breakdown was heavily on the grad side. About 77% were looking for either masters, about 57% masters, 20% doctorate, and the remaining 23% were looking for undergraduates. So skewing heavily on the grad side in terms of the demographics of the survey respondents. Now, when looking at the most important decision factors, what was making them decide this is the school that I'm going to apply to, they were looking first and foremost for why they decided on a particular school. 52% said employment outcomes was the number one reason they decided for a particular school. 49% said reputation and ranking. Okay. 33% said unique specialist programs was the reason. 30% said it was the international community at that individual school. And 30% talked about accommodation. And again, keep in mind, this survey is for students going all over the world to top 4 English-speaking destinations, but many other countries as well. So not just to the U.S. So those are some pretty significant numbers there in terms of the priorities, the top 5 priorities for why they chose a particular school. And now you look at why they chose a particular program and academic subject that they wanted to teach or to learn. 54% said that they chose a particular program because it had significant work placement or internship programs. 49% said funding opportunities at that particular program was the number one choice. 47% said affordability of the fees. 46% said opportunities for academic networking. And 17% only suggested that teaching staff in that particular program was the most important reason why they chose that program. So interesting breakdown of students here. What we see, what has gained strength. Keystone Report did say that of those factors, prospective students, quote unquote, had a greater interest in internships and work placements, with the popularity of those growing by 46% in the last year. So accommodation and campus life, significantly more influential for students interested in studying internationally as well. So the significant jump in the last year for this survey was for need for greater interest in internships and work placements. So if that's something that you're highlighting in your ComFlow, great, you're already there. And that's a good sign that your messaging will be reaching these students that are particularly Keystone students in Africa and Asia for the most part, where 74% of the survey respondents were from. But if you're not covering that focus in your programs for interests in internships and work placements, that's something you really want to make sure is now highlighted in your ComFlow messaging, because that's what your future students want. And that's not new. And that's just one thing I said is I don't get overhyped about one particular group of survey results from one company. But when you see consistently over the last year or two, we see the rise in the importance of outcomes, of jobs, of internships and work placements, preparing students for jobs. Those are the things that matter most. And that's almost universal across all surveys, not just this one-off survey here. So I think we're really seeing this as a focus that if you're not already focusing on that in your messaging, in terms of work placements, in terms of jobs, in terms of internship experiences, anything pre-career, that's something you should adjust your messaging to include. Additionally, with accommodation and campus life, this is typically one thing in the United States we kind of take for granted because, yeah, we're residential campuses for almost all of our schools, unless you're in a big city and or a community campus, like a lot of community colleges might have been in the past. We take for granted at the four-year institution level that we are residential, but the rest of the world isn't. And most colleges outside the United States, very few have dedicated facilities for housing for international students. So you play to your strengths. Not only, and they might not be a strength that you realize you have, but you do. If you have significant accommodation on your campus and you're not highlighting that early on in the admissions and communication flow messaging to your prospects, that's something that is a missed opportunity. Don't wait until after they're admitted to tell them about housing. Make it a priority earlier on in the process when you can say to them, hey, we have adequate housing for our international students. It's a value that we place on for students coming from abroad, that you live on campus, that we want you to have that experience, particularly at the undergraduate level, maybe less of a priority at the grad level, but the availability of housing, particularly off-campus apartments, even if you don't have it on campus, but off-campus apartments right near the campus that work with the university, that might be properties that are managed through a third party but are owned by the university. Those are the kind of facilities that future students want to know about when they're coming from abroad, because it's much harder to find housing. And so knowing that there's resources on campus to help before they even get to the admitted student stage where that becomes ultimate priority, the fact that they know you have that housing available early in the process is so vital, because it can help sway them, because they're hearing from their seniors who are already off and already applying through the process and are having challenges getting into the facilities that are finding housing on the campus. Certainly very rare outside the U.S., but certainly even rarer, making sure that they have accommodations guaranteed, and that is not something that happens at most other institutions outside the U.S. So make sure you're focusing on these elements as you communicate with your future students. It's not just a matter of having the facilities on your campus that you can certainly mention it to them later in the process, but it's letting them know you have it, letting them know how the job placement internship coordinators in each discipline, in the disciplines that they might be in, that you have data that supports the placement rates for your international students, hopefully. Getting that kind of content out to your future students early enough in the process is so important, because it's not something that you think about if you're coming from a domestic student mindset. Students expect they're going to live on campus as a first-year undergraduate, that there's going to be job placement. But until you emphasize that, until you're looking at it through an international student lens and see, hey, these students are worried about housing, and look at all these other countries that are having problems with immigration and lack of housing in the areas around these universities. That's causing some institutions to say, don't come if you don't have housing already sorted. That's a competitive advantage we have. And if you don't take advantage of that, it's a missed opportunity. Similarly for work placement stats and job placement information and internship information. Make sure that's available early on in the process, because this is the other factor or other key finding from this Keystone survey, is that students are filing more applications to a greater range of countries than ever before. Not just more applications, but greater range of countries as well. And this is something that you need to factor in, because when you realize that the student that you're recruiting in India, or the student you're recruiting in Ghana or Nigeria or Japan or China or Korea, Vietnam, they're applying to countries, multiple countries, not just the United States, not just US and UK, not just Canada, US, UK, Australia. They could be applying to Germany, France, Hong Kong, or other countries as well that have English language programs. This is something you need to think about, and as to how you market differently to students that are applying to multiple countries, not just multiple institutions in your country. And multiple institutions in your country are not going to be your domestic competitors, likely. They're going to be much broader range of types of schools, small liberal arts colleges if you're an undergraduate institution, to large public institutions, to mid-sized suburban schools. All of those could be your competitors internationally for students that you're applying to, not just in the United States, but to similar institutions in other countries as well. So think about that as you're putting together your comp plans, and thinking about developing, if you don't already have it, developing key messages that you can insert into your comp plans. If you don't have a separate international stream for communication flows, develop these kinds of messages that don't just focus on your institutional values and advantages that you talk about domestically. Think about it from a country level. What are the advantages of students who want to come to the United States for study in terms of the campus community environment that we often ignore when we kind of take it as for granted that, that we have activities all year round, and we have incredible student organizations, and those are the things that we talk about and drop into messaging, but it becomes a differentiator when you're comparing U.S. institutions to institutions in a lot of other countries that are just destinations to go for your studies, not a place that's a campus living learning environment where you do everything with those 2,000-3,000 other new first-year students that you're with every year, each of your years on campus. So think about these things, not just in the lens of how we talk about it to our domestic students is the same way we need to talk about it to international students. It's not. There needs to be messaging that focuses on the different aspects of the U.S. higher education landscape compared to other countries. Not where you're going to call them out by destination, but you are going to mention, hey, if you're worried about housing, don't. We've got you covered. If you're worried about job placement rates, don't. We've got you covered. Here's the data to support why. All of these things are things that you want to be thinking about as you're putting together messaging. And these kind of survey data that we're seeing here now from Keystone and others in recent months definitely confirms why these items are so important and need to be in part of your messaging stream, not just after they're admitted, but early on in the lead gen stage, where you're talking to these prospects after you've met them at college fairs, after you've got their names from, they've visited your search sites on the various lead gen sources. All of those types of conversations you want to have should be early on in the process, not later, because they are critical to deciding whether an international student's going to even think about applying to you. And if they know you're ticking boxes that are important concerns for them regarding job placement, regarding housing, regarding funding, regarding accommodation, something as simple as that, then you're going to be ahead of the game. So think about that a little bit more strategically as you put together the pieces of your communication plan. So that's the first question of the day. The second is, where are English language taught programs growing? And this does require a little bit of a nuanced explanation here. When we say English taught programs, we're talking not about English as a second language programs around the world. That's a whole different subject. We're talking about academic programs that are taught in English. So obviously in the United States, in the UK, in Canada, outside of Quebec, and in Australia, our programs are all taught in English. There are other English language destinations in Ireland, in Hong Kong, where the language is actually of instruction is English. Other countries around the world that have, throughout the Caribbean, through some African nations where the curriculum is entirely in English, those are English taught programs. So what has happened when we talk about growth of English taught programs, the big four, the US, UK, Canada, Australia, has seen in recent years, particularly post-pandemic, a decline in the share. Sorry, not in the total number, but in a decline in the share of English taught programs around the world. Now, 78% of students. This is one of the data points in the University World News article about this. 78% of students from non-English speaking countries seeking to study in English still enroll in colleges and universities in the US, UK, Canada, Australia. Okay, so that's nothing new, 78%. But the Big Four's share of this market has declined by 4% in relation to the worldwide number of English taught programs globally. So there are now more than, this was a survey report done by Study Portals, British Council, and IELTS. So those are the three main huge players in international ed circles, obviously IELTS and British Council and Study Portals. So with regard to that, the report showed that there are over 40,700 English taught programs offered by more than 1,700 universities outside the Big Four. And that's an increase in the number of programs of 48% compared with the worldwide increase of 22% when the Big Four are included. So 48% more programs, English taught programs outside of the Big Four have increased in the last 3 years only. So that's a significant number, and that tells you a lot in terms of what is motivating international student demand for study abroad. It's English language programs are increasing in number. And they're increasing in number because, and one of the other corollary effects of this, or reasons that this is happening, is students are looking for programs closer to home. And we see this acutely in the Asian market, but that students who might have previously only gone to the Big Four are now looking at other possible destinations for their study, kind of going back to what we saw in the survey results from Keystone. You see students now looking at destinations in countries where it's not a whole day or more to get from their homeland to the English language program, English study program in the country that they want to study in. You're seeing a lot more of that now, that they're looking closer to home. Maybe the budgets are stretched with their families, so they don't have as many resources to go perhaps to the Big Four as they might in the past. So they're looking closer to home. So what does that actually mean for your students? So we're talking about this challenge here that we have in marketing our programs to students in other countries, and here we're talking about our academic degree programs because that's what this article is about. And there's also a Study Portals article about this as well, which I'll drop the links to both of these in the chat. So what we see in both the individual article summary by University World News on this report by British Council IELTS and Study Portals, we also see in Study Portals magazine, the June Higher Ed Data into Insights report, one of the newer digital productions that Study Portals has been putting out for the last few months. A very good resource if you're into data and trying to convert that into insights and practical applications for your institution and your international student plans. Definitely take a look at that monthly newsletter that they put out. Some great content in there. One of the articles is about this English taught programs list in the report. So the growth beyond the Big Four is understandable. You can understand that the number of programs offered in the Big Four isn't really changing dramatically from year to year. We add new majors around the world in English language destination countries, but it's the real growth has been in these other destination hubs, these education hubs in Southeast Asia, in the Middle East, potentially in Africa, other countries that are trying to develop these hubs for English taught programs. That growth is quite significant, and particularly in computer science and IT, because those are high demand STEM programs are in demand all around the world. So great report from the folks at Study Portals and IELTS and British Council. Looking forward to seeing how we respond and how we perhaps change our messaging to accommodate for why students might not want to do those kind of programs, but the knowledge that it's available to them is something we need to be aware of as we're messaging. So very good information from Study Portals and British Council and IELTS. So thanks to them for that. We're going to move on to our last question of the day, which has to do with what are the impacts of restrictive government policies on migration. Now, we've been covering this topic in various iterations, particularly as it relates to individual countries and their responses, what the governments have done, actual decisions made by governments to cap international student visas for the next couple of years in Canada as they're doing. That's targeting primarily vocational and private colleges in Canada, where we look at Australia, that they are now implementing a cap what that's going to mean, limiting the numbers going to schools outside the group of 8 in Australia. And again, focusing on their vocational education sector, where a lot of the bad actors and Mickey Mouse degrees that the UK is talking about now, they're focusing on. Not necessarily vocational, but certainly degrees that don't really provide students with great degree of opportunities when they finish. So all those are part of restrictive policies that governments have been putting in place, and most of the big four, the U.S. is the only one that hasn't had new government restrictions on immigration in the last few years. Post Trump's travel bans in the first few days of his administration in 2017. So it's been relatively free of restrictive action by government in the United States. And in fact, there's been numerous ways to make it easier for students to come by eliminating the need for any applicants for a U.S. student visa that had previously received a U.S. visa in the previous 5 years would not have to go to the consulate for a visa interview. So that certainly eliminates a hurdle for many who might have been in the U.S. at one point for visitor visa or previous student status. Then you saw opportunities to staff back up consulates and embassies around the world for visa to assist with the visa wait time challenges that exist around the world. So we've done that kind of analysis on what's happening in other countries, but what we haven't really done, haven't seen a lot of, is something kind of we're starting to hear some more of these stories, and what we're going to cover today are 2 or 3 different impacts on the larger international education ecosystem in the world, and then also individual institutions that might be touched on by the challenges here. We also see in certain countries, in the UK in particular, what these changes in migration policy in the government are going to be impacting the number of students that come into these institutions that have become so heavily dependent on the tuition revenues to keep them alive. You now see a report couple weeks ago that between 60 and 80% of UK universities will be running deficits in the next 2 to 3 years because of the decrease in the number of international students. You see the consequences in the staff layoffs at institutions where they're going to be having so many fewer international students that they won't need. There's going to be some interesting reports next week that I think we'll focus on as well, that will touch on the total numbers of layoffs in certain areas, in certain key markets. So we we'll have some good data for that in the newsletter next week, as we'll probably again touch on it here in the roundup. But the one of the articles I wanted to share today is one about IDP. IDP is the granddaddy of them all when it comes to international ed companies. They are based in Australia, but they have offices globally. They are active in each of the 4 major markets in terms of sending students to those 4 major markets, have agents in 50 countries around the world that are driven to sending students to all the major destinations. Now, what IDP has said is they've told investors that it intends to make significant cuts in response to restrictive policies in key study destinations, including Australia, Canada, and the UK. So that is significant, obviously, because those are 3 of the 4 big markets we've talked about before. And they are predicting that the size of the international education market will shrink by 20 to 25% over the next 12 months. That's up to a quarter of the entire international ed market will shrink that much in the next 12 months. That is really crazy numbers, and the volume of what that means for them, particularly in those 3 other destinations, Canada, UK, Australia, that they're going to be facing some layoffs, that there are some short-term financial concerns on falling demand for IELTS testing, which IDP is a third owner of. They're predicting a 15 to 20% decline in the volume of IELTS test takers and solid average fee growth in 2025. that they are looking at the UK, the aggregate volume of study permits for Australia, UK, and Canada declined by 20 to 30% in the first quarter of 2024 compared to the same period last year. So this is a huge challenge for those three countries, and in terms of IDP, the biggest player in the international ed service provider landscape, that these objectives, particularly in Australia, when you hear them talking about a net migration reduction of up to 50%, that includes students, not exclusively students. The UK's skilled worker salary threshold and band dependence has led to a decrease in interest in that country as well. So these are some significant challenges for a company like IDP. You see in the UK that the OFS, the Office for Students, that's the regulatory think tank, not think tank, but the only body that is independent for the review of students in the UK sector, that higher ed providers do need to change how they're doing student recruitment, that they have had overly optimistic recruitment predictions, that they will need to adjust the way they recruit, that a very modest increase of UK entrants and a 45% drop in international entrants across the sector in 24-25. No growth for the rest of the period forecast could mean a net reduction in income over $8.4 billion or £billion by 2026-27. So that would be a significant change and challenge for British universities. Not sure, the report says they're not sure who's going to be most affected, but students are obviously the ones being most impacted in this in terms of ability to come. Those are already here, and the impact that has, the negative press has on them. They say, OFS says that the growth in Indian student market is showing signs of slowing down, so it'll become less of an engine. That's primarily because of the dependent study visa ban. That they need to be careful about setting fees, because they have become so dependent that to increase these fees more to compensate for the loss of revenue they're already going to be experiencing with reduced numbers could be a dangerous balance to cut, and that the focus should actually be on cost cutting in terms of where they can make realistic savings. So very interesting to see that OFS report. And so I think that we're seeing today a confluence of events around the world that are impacting not just the individual institutions, the students that are looking to come, but also the larger providers that are helping to send those students. And the world we live in is increasingly interconnected, and we know that when policies change like this, it will have far-reaching implications, not only in the countries that the changes are intended to impact, but in terms of the worldwide global demand for study in that particular area. So that's all we have for you this week on the Midweek Roundup. We appreciate you being a part of the SMIE community with our events like the Roundup each week and our newsletter. So thanks so much again for your time. Look forward to seeing you around.